the church is a peculiar place. And no, that's not an invitation for you to start to make a list, though I'm sure we all could do, of our experiences of the peculiarities of church life. But to reflect on two particular characteristics of the church which maybe sit rather oddly together, or at least at first sight. The first is that the church is a place of welcome, and we would often say of radical welcome, of all-embracing welcome. When I think back, every local church that I've had experience of has advertised in some way that it is a place of welcome, whether or not that's more honoured in the breach than in the actuality. We like to think of ourselves as a place where there is always a spare pew, an empty chair, and someone at the door to say, "Come in, friend, and join us." On the other hand, the church is also a place of challenge, and again a place of a radical challenge, of discipleship of Jesus that goes way beyond usual earthly challenges. Again, I find it hard to think of a church where the people within it would not think of them being representative of a call to discipleship that is profound. And those two sides of the church come from Jesus himself, who on the one hand said, "Come unto me, all who are heavy laden and carry burdens, and I will give you rest." And on the other hand, told people to take up their cross and to follow him if they were to be his disciples. Grace and purity are both characteristics of the church and belong together, I would argue. Sometimes in the church it might be that one of those gets more emphasis than the other, and maybe our different Christian traditions will reflect that, our different churches sometimes. But I think we are most truly the church and most true to our calling of Jesus when we hold those two things together, grace and purity. So I bring that reflection on the life of the church to our hearing of what is our reading from Matthew's Gospel, another parable, Matthew chapter 22, or actually maybe we should say more than one parable. I think we can maybe see or hear two parables in this, and to our modern ears it may seem two parables that have been bolted together in a rather careless and clumsy way. We might ask, well, did Matthew do that when he wrote the Gospel? Join two different parables of Jesus, one about grace and one about purity, together? Or was it Jesus himself who joined these two images together? But I think the important point for me is that we hear those two parables together for all the ways in which there seem to be inconsistencies and a grating between the logic of the two stories. So see in your mind if you can separate out a parable of grace and a parable of purity. Once more, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, maltreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet." Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?" And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, "Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen." So yes, the two parts of the reading, the two parables, I might argue, do grate against each other. That poor chap who has simply responded to that gracious and open invitation to fill the master's banquet hall with guests so that the festivities might begin. And yet there he is being put to death because he's not wearing his right wedding clothes. But I think the important thing for me is how the parable brings together that theme on the one hand of grace and the other hand of purity. And as those two stories get mingled together, it's clear in the story that both are equally important to the king, to God. Both are matters of ultimate significance. And neither are matters that should be dealt with complacency or with neglect. Purity and grace in the life of the kingdom of God fundamentally belong together, and are both together part of the challenge of hearing the call of Jesus and being part of his kingdom.